day to you all. Welcome to the World Coffee Alliance Crosstalk webinar. My name is Joseph de Villiers. I am the CEO and founder of World Coffee Alliance, and I will be your host and moderator this afternoon. Today, we are very privileged to be with some of the great global leaders in the coffee industry who will share with us some of their thoughts and insights about a very important topic. The question is the coffee supply chain fragmented or broken? We have also invited a well-seasoned supply chain expert to help us navigate with some of the technicalities involved in the discussion of the topic at hand. So let me introduce you our guest today. First, we have Peter Kettler, the Global Product Manager of Fairtrade International. Say hello, Peter. Okay, we'll...
Hi, everyone.
Okay.
Happy to be here.
Excellent, brilliant, okay. Peter has 25 years of specialty coffee experience across manufacturing, retail, trading, and finance. In 2004, he founded Radio Lifeline, and in 2015, he partnered with the United Nations Climate Policy Center to broadcast weekly programs on climate change. Our next guest is Miss Annette Penzel. She is the Executive Director of Global Coffee Platform, or GCP. Please say hello, Annette.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Pleased to be here.
Fantastic, brilliant. Okay, Miss Penzel brings more than 10 years of experience in the international coffee sector and in the field of development cooperation, including corporate sustainability, public-private partnership, voluntary standards development, and capacity building. As the Director of Sustainability Innovations of the former 4C Association and the GCP Interim Executive Director since 2016 July, Ms. Penzel was central to the many successful partnerships, most notably Vision 2020, which connected the public and the private partnership in producing countries. Our third guest is Dr. Dennis Suju.
Hello.
The Chief Economist of the International Coffee Organization, ICO. Say hello, Dennis.
Hello. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon.
Okay. And Dr. Suju was awarded International Economy at the University Aix-Marseille in France, and he was appointed as Chief Economist of the International Coffee Organization in 1996. His research has been mainly oriented towards risk management and in commodity markets and macroeconomic and environmental aspects. Our next guest is Mr. Paul Rook, Executive Director of British Coffee Association. Say hello, Paul.
Hello to everybody. Looking forward to a good discussion.
Excellent. Okay. Paul has been an agricultural graduate. He has 25 years of experience in trade association, covering policy, technical, and contractual issues. He is also an expert in Traders Expert Group on EU trade agreements, and also aspects of agriculture of the EU's high-level forum for a better functioning supply chain. Our next guest is Ms. Kellen Emanuel, the Executive Director of International Women's Coffee Alliance, IWCA. Please say hello, Kellen.
Hi, thank you, Joseph Mavis, for organizing today's event and hosting us all. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Okay. She has spent nearly 20 years engaging stakeholders and across private, public, and non-profit sectors, and her experience cut across diverse regional transportation, planning, industrial energy, efficiency, and corporate sustainability consulting. Okay, last but not the least, our technical expert for the day is Mr. Michael Mowat, the Consulting Director of PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC. Please say hello, Michael.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Looking forward to a good engaging conversation.
Thank you. Michael has over 20 years experience working in supply chain with FMCG and consultancy. His experience covers strategy to execution to results, working with many leading global retail and consumer companies. Okay, thank you very much. That is those are the speakers. Now we are going to discuss the agenda for today. And before we start the agenda, you can see, I just want to mention at this stage that we are full house today, and I just wish to thank all of you who took time to register to participate in this webinar, and we apologize in advance to those people who cannot get in, but we will try our best. But I also want to define our journey and destination today, so that we will take you all with us in every step of the way. So we have participants coming from Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, India, Peru, Angola, Mexico, Vietnam, Brazil, USA, Europe, and many, many more. So we apologize at this stage for those people who cannot get in, but we will try our best. We will actually publish this anyway as an on-demand thing on our website and also on YouTube channel. So we have 90 minutes overall, and I have divided the agenda into 3 segments. First segment is about the linear and circular economy. Second is about the challenges and socioeconomic impacts. And third, the resilient strategies and agile solutions to solve all these problems. So out of that 90 minutes, we have allocated 30 minutes for Q&A. So I hope you, audience, will give our panel a rightful grilling. No pressure there. Okay, let's start. Okay, so let's start the first segment. And the first segment is about linear and circular. And we will ask our technical expert to give us a brief background on the linear and circular economy. Okay, Michael, you have the floor. 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Joseph. Apologies in advance if I speak too quickly. It's the joys of being Scottish. So I think from a kind of, let's start from the beginning. So what do we mean by a linear? I think we mean by linear is very much kind of, you mine the raw materials, you convert them into a product, you use it, you throw it away, right? So to try and bring it home to yourselves, yeah, estimation of about 500,000 tons of spent coffee grounds are unnecessarily discarded in the UK today. There's another way. How informed are consumers? What can they use for them at home versus sending to a recycler, to use for biomass fuels, etc. In other words, how do you turn that into something that could be circular? Circular, it's a closed loop where products, materials keep circulating in a high value state of use for as long as possible. Nirvana being a world where nothing goes to waste. But we're a bit away from that. Examples of circular in action from my perspective, when dealing with some of my clients. So Timberland, the shoemaker, they use virgin rubber, which can come from tires that have reached the end of their product life cycle, to make outsoles for their shoes. If I look at something like a brewery, AB InBev, who are aiming by 2025 to have 100% of their products and packaging that's returnable or made from majority of kind of recycled content. Today they're about 60% of the way there. But I think the kind of point we're trying to make here is there are journeys to go on, right? And no one has got this perfect yet. My experience, as I say, as Joseph rightly pointed out, I've been working with a number of retail consumer clients for a long time. It's been talked about for about the last 5 to 7 years that I've been hearing a lot about, this circular economy and being sustainable. But I think the last kind of couple of years, I've really started to see kind of major change in the thinking and how we can run that through supply chains, and how it's not always about that lowest cost point, but it's also what does our consumers expect from us. So in my own opinion, the reasons for change, yes, they're blurry, because for each one that I believe is doing the right reason, doing this for the right reasons, brands are being hammered due to the visibility of their products long after the value has been used by the consumer. So if you look at things like World Cleanup Day, you see the big brands, the Cokes, the Pepsis, and Nestle's, Unilevers, they are the big companies that are visible when waste is picked up, right? Even to Prince William on the TV last week in the UK, talking about his fact his granddad was mocked for his views around how to do something around sustainability and circular economies to his dad and now to him. It's his view is he can't afford not to do something about it. So there is a real, you can see a lot of energy behind it. And I think, what I would suggest is this is a topic that's time has now arrived. It's been brewing for a while, but it's resonating more and more with consumers as we become better informed and expect more from our brands. This extension, the partners and the supply chain that supports them. Joseph.
Okay, thank you. That was under 3 minutes, so thank you for that. Okay, can we ask our panel now to respond to that or speak your mind about this? Let's start with Peter. Peter?
Hi, thanks for that, Michael. Yeah, I think that, that's an important part of the conversation when we talk about how coffee is grown, consumed, recycled out in the world. I tend to focus more when I'm thinking about this subject on language, specifically as it relates to how coffee is bought and sold. We use very specific language in the coffee industry, both to describe flavor characteristics. We have a whole lexicon that everyone has to learn to be able to share these experiences and to be able to assess the quality of coffee. And then in the commercial arena, when coffee is bought and sold, because the price changes, well, on average every 3 minutes, sometimes even more often than that, there's no time to really affect paper contracts. And so that's one of the things that really attracted me to coffee in the beginning, was this kind of idea that your word is your bond and that language matters. And in terms of how we describe how coffee moves from farm to cup, it always sort of struck me that we use this term supply chain. And I've been banging this particular drum now for almost a decade. And some people, think that it's simply a semantical exercise, that we're just interchanging words. But I think that words matter. And when we start using the word chain, it denotes a hierarchy. It denotes a transactional nature between one link to the other. So you really only have to worry about the link right before you and right after you. And so I've been really advocating for the use of the words supply circle, because I think when we're talking about sustainability, it sort of denotes a table. And if we have everybody, all the stakeholders, everybody involved in the supply chain around a table, then sustainability gets defined as everyone's needs need to be met in order for it to be sustainable. And I think that we have inherited a system of buying and trading coffee that was made by people in the global north, created by people in the global north, to really create price mechanisms and protections for people further up the chain than those at the very bottom. And so I think that while we have all sort of inherited this system, it's time to really revisit it and assess whether it's really fit to purpose in terms of the realities that we're facing right now in terms of climate change and global economics.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That's excellent. Okay. Okay, let's talk to Annette. Annette, we will hear your opinion about this.
Thank you, Joseph, and very nice to have heard, Peter, what you just said, because I had a similar idea to start that reflection somehow. No, we are invited here to something that sometimes doesn't really happen, like have this open conversation and look at words that actually shape the way we are doing business, or have been shaping the way we have been doing business or development, or both of that. Now, what struck me from what you had said and what you had said earlier here, Michael, it's actually in other words, what you are proposing is a different approach to what we all refer to as sustainability. And several people have been saying like, oh, isn't sustainability by now kind of a buzzword sometimes? And what does it really mean? Doesn't it actually mean sitting around a table and making sure the way actually that Peter, that you have now tried to in a nutshell summarize what sustainability could mean for us in the coffee sector and how we could break through some of these or challenge some of these paradigms that have been shaping our minds, shaping our business and other actions there. So I wanted to connect to that thought and actually show how the Global Coffee Platform has been, it's a relatively young organization made of members from all over the coffee sector. So coffee producers, trade, roasters, retail, development partners, NGOs, coffee sustainability standards. Actually, some of you in this call here are members here as well. And what we have been trying and are still trying, and we're working hard on that with our members and the sustainability coffee platforms in producing countries, is changing or challenging some of those paradigms. It's a chain. It's kind of somebody demanding and somebody supplying. And there's power plays attached to that, no? So challenging those chains to change is somehow what also many other coffee stakeholders have been starting to do. In the Global Coffee Platform, that is very tangible, practical, in a sense that we believe there is need to put farmers and coffee workers first and listen with this roundtable idea, listen to what the needs are, and put also coffee producing countries more in the center of the conversation. And from there, then see, okay, so what are the needs? What are the priorities? What are those sustainability priorities as well? And then start working on collective action. There, I hope we have some time further down this conversation to also hear, like how some of the challenges that we've identified here together and beyond this group are being already acted upon, because it's not that there's nothing out there. But it's now the time, perhaps, that we are all, as humanity, challenged by COVID, that we can take one step back and think about the paradigms and how we can double down on challenging some of those and overcoming them.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, Dr. Siju?
Yes, good. I think it's a very interesting topic. Starting from what the expert just said about the linear economy, with regard to coffee, I think it's a supply chain. The point is how we see from farm, how the coffee production and the marketing is organized within the country, and how different partners from outside involved in order to make sure that farmers can get, everybody in the value chain, but particularly the farmer, can get a reward of what the reward of their work. So from there, we can see whether in each of the producing country, whether we have the similar image, the similar way of doing business. Then we can explore where there is problems and where how can we together with partners, with the companies who are in the business of the other side of the trade, how to see to put all this together in order to drive towards sustainability. Because for us, sustainability, as the previous speaker Paul said, the first thing is whether coffee farming is a profitable business, and then after that, what else? How are we going to make it more sustainable in terms of environment? How to, all this issue of a circular economy, but we can also, if we have a time, we can also explore this and see where the weakest link is.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Thank you. I'm now 7 months into my experience of the world of coffee, so I guess I can still look at some of these issues from the outside, sort of peering in. And from that respect, I'm actually surprised at how much is going on. And I think somebody earlier on talked about it as a journey. And I do see, when I look at some of the companies that BCA represents, that they are very much on a journey. And we had our own webinar looking at zero carbon actually only 24 hours ago. And I think, one of the things that I was very surprised about was the amount of information that's now coming through that explains to people how actually that journey can be a profitable journey for the chain. And I probably accept again that we maybe should move away from some of the language that we've used in the past. So I think people are starting to understand how actually moving along towards a circular supply chain is actually beneficial in a number of ways, but importantly for businesses, and let's not be shy about it, it's beneficial from an economic point of view as well. And I think one of the other things that sort of interested me in it, and I picked it up from a webinar that was run a few weeks ago in the UK, and looking at agriculture more generally, but it was actually somebody from the coffee industry that talked about it, who said, we probably shouldn't just look at the chain, we should also look at the people within it and the relationships within it, and understand how we need to change the actors' understanding and the actors' approach, rather than necessarily the linkage and the elements of the chain as well. So I think we have a sort of a two-way approach. But my first few months, I have been mightily impressed with the amount of work that's going on, the information that's being generated, and the push that that we are making towards this more sustainable and sustainable in an economic, in an environmental way as well. So I think we should be slightly careful about beating ourselves up too much, and recognize that yes, there is a long way to go, but yes, we have actually set out on a journey, and probably to a greater extent than a number of other commodities. And there is some very good work, and we should recognise that, and we should look at how we build on that going forward.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Kellen?
Yes, thank you, Joseph, and thank you for the opportunity to go after so many wonderful ideas have been shared. I'll try not to repeat, but I do echo a lot of the sentiments and the ideas that have come through. I have the pleasure and honor to represent an organization that now includes 26 different countries across all roles in coffee. 90% of our members are coffee producers. And so I think it's also important to add, as a point of consideration, that it's important to have these discussions. It's important to recognize the role of language, but it's equally, if not more important, the critical urgency to accelerate and accelerate meaningful change and meaningful impact. And so, in that spirit, the question you had asked us to comment on, is it a linear supply chain or a circular supply chain? I echo the sentiment that it can be, and we are showing signs of a circularity, of full circle, but we need to accelerate the pace at which we get there. And I think from my perspective in working to represent 90% producer members, I think we need to accelerate the pace of access, not just to discussions, but access to positions of power, access to the economic elements that are critical for achieving a more equitable coffee industry. And so I think what inspires me and what I drive toward is looking to what are the tools that can help those that are currently in positions of power, economic power, access power, decision-making power, to help them understand this new paradigm shift we're all talking about today. And so I'm particularly inspired by fields such as social impact accounting, which will help those who are in positions of great economic resource to begin to understand the quantitative inspirations and motivations to make investments in critical access, empowerment, etc. So I just wanted to add that I think the one item that's missing from the discussion thus far is urgency. urgency and the critical role of access to making meaningful change across the industry at large, but especially for those that are most vulnerable.
Okay, thank you, Callum. We'll make note of that urgency, and obviously, we want to make sure that the pace is improved. Okay, let's go to the move on to the second segment now. The second segment, of course, will include the challenges, the bottlenecks, the socio-economic impacts on sustainability, and if we can find the weakest link, that's even better. So let's start with Peter. Peter.
Thanks, Joseph. I don't know whether I can identify what the weakest link is. I think that when we're talking about the coffee supply circle and the questions of sustainability, these always used to be questions or topics that were talked about in terms of purely ethical concerns. A lot of times we would see the most egregious consequences of the current system and, apply projects and band-aids and go, we need to do something about this. And then the price of coffee would go up and a lot of these projects would evaporate. And a lot of times they didn't reflect the real needs of the coffee producing communities or families or individual farmers. They were more tagged to things that we wanted to see happen in coffee producing countries. And I think that now sustainability has really become an issue, not just of ethics, but also about it poses an existential threat to the existence of the coffee industry, because we're starting to see a generation coming up and seeing the struggles that their parents and grandparents have undergone in being coffee farmers. And it's often viewed as being the lowest rung on the economic opportunity ladder, right? And they have increased access to education. They have a much wider window on the world because of social media and connection to the internet and better access to education. And so we're starting to see, youth flight from coffee farming into urban areas. And I think that unless we can, as a previous speaker said, show that coffee is a viable way of making a living, then we're depending on a group of 25 million coffee farmers getting up every day and saying yes. And as soon as they start saying no, the whole coffee industry is sort of built on sand. So I think that we have to address this as ethical and also business. And I would reflect Callum's view that we have to have an urgency about this, because we've gone through price crisis after price crisis. White paper after white paper has been created, and yet we haven't made any fundamental changes.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Annette?
Thanks for all these excellent thoughts and considerations, just building on some of what has been said. So the question being like, where is the weakest link? And going back to our understanding that we're trying to promote here, that it's actually a circle. So who do we need most to sustain this beautiful beverage, and to make sure that once we can all come together in real time, that we can do this over a cup of coffee, right? I believe that also, as Peter had said, it's the farmers, it's the coffee farming communities, it's especially the smallholders, and it's also the workers who are often forgotten, the permanent and the temporal workers. If the people behind that beautiful beverage that we all love so much, that brings us joy from a consumer perspective, but should also bring joy from a producer perspective, if that doesn't work, if that equilibrium is not there, the circle falls to the one side or to the other side. So a lot has been said about that. I believe we are getting closer to a better, much more holistic understanding of what are some of the root causes that bring us to this lack of equilibrium, be it in the market side, be it on the the question about equal opportunity side, be it about, like having coffee as a viable, attractive business opportunity, not only for people who are running coffee shops, but also for, and especially for people who are having coffee in these beautiful landscapes that are actually also contributing to environmental services and currently are, in most of the cases, not being paid for. So there is more understanding there, but I would totally stress and also support this need for urgency. We need to do more, and we need to have collective action to address some of these underlying systemic challenges that actually is a big threat for our coffee industry, while on the same side, there is increasing demand for coffee and for sustainable coffee in our world. So farmers first, and listening to what farmers and farming communities and also workers need and want, especially the younger people, the next generation of coffee growers. That needs to be put into the center of our conversations. In the case of the Global Coffee Platform, there is a lot of good effort underway with our members from all sides of the different coffee world, but also very importantly, listening to public and private stakeholders in coffee producing countries, because this is where coffee is being produced after all. So I think it's time for collective leadership and to step up and rise to those challenges of ours in our time.
Oh, thank you, Annette. Dr. Sidju?
Yes, I think we have many challenges, but the main one from my point of view is how to make the coffee industry in importing countries, the big corporates, how to make them aware that this business, to make it sustainable, it needs to be profitable for all participants in the value chain. So, and the weakest link, obviously, is not only the farmer, but it is producing countries, because their participation in the global value chain is very marginal. The organization, the ICO, is now working on is the second, with partners, is a second report, the Coffee Development Report, talking more about the value chain, how this global value chain is distributed around the whole coffee world. So my point is, the weakest link is farm community, but it is producing country, because the generation of value addition take place mostly in importing country, and sometimes there are tariff barrier or non-tariff barrier that can also prevent or reduce the effort of some business people in producing country to access those markets. So we think this is a part of a contribution that will be interesting to look at it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sidju. Paul?
I think somebody earlier on used the word access, and for me that's one of the sort of the critical points, and it's access to a number of different things. But a few months ago, I remember hearing a farmer, and apologies, I forget which producing country he came from, but he was talking about access to information being one of the things that he struggled most with. Now, in my sort of time when I'm not dealing with coffee, I'm a sheep farmer. And I'm a very small scale sheep farmer. So I do recognize some of these challenges. I struggle with access to information. I understand what the market price is, but I don't necessarily understand what some of the options that I might have in terms of accessing a better price, in terms of maybe working with other like-minded producers to get access to a better market. Do I get access to the right agronomic information? How do I obtain it? And I think those are all areas that I recognize as a small producer in my own sort of part commodity, if you like. And I appreciate, I'm in a much better position than an awful lot of coffee farmers. But I think some of the principles are the same. So I think there is this sort of challenge. And I know I've listened to some of Annette's colleagues talk about some of the work that they're doing in particular countries, and to my mind, I think Uganda was one that you're working. Those were the sorts of issues I think that we have to get down to. How do we actually help people on the ground with some of the practical issues, with access, and it may be access to finance. And I know that in the recent ICO discussions, there was talk about this disbalance between what money might be available and in what form versus the form in which the industry wants it and can cope with it. But again, access to information, access to inputs, access to understanding, the opportunities that I have. So I think that's where we have to sort of work. That again, we have started on the journey, but I agree, there is an urgency and there is much more that we need to do.
Oh, thanks, Paul. Kellen?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. I have a bit of a different perspective on where we as a collective industry are weakest. And I think it's not necessarily one particular role. I think it's important to make sure to be clear that producers and producing communities are incredibly resilient and strong. That is not to say that they are not disserviced. But I think, getting back to Peter's point about language being important, weak is a really challenging word. And I want to make sure that we're very clear, because I know it's the sentiment of everyone, that producers are incredibly strong and it's a resilient role in the value chain. So I think when we're talking about what are weak links, it's important to start to get away from one particular role as being the source of our greatest challenge or the need of our greatest intervention. And I think the greatest need for our intervention is for more systems thinking, more looking at not only the circle that Peter had suggested, but the ripple effects of that circle. And I find it helpful when having conversations like this that are very conceptual in nature to point to specific examples. And one specific example, the ICO 2 years ago put together a wonderful report that highlighted the differences in affecting the coffee industry by gender. And they focused specifically on rural producing communities. And one of the 6 areas that they identified where rural women were uniquely disadvantaged, contrary to men, was access to finance. And as we all know, access to finance is critical in economic mobility. Well, in terms of systems thinking, I want to highlight an excellent example of where we can turn a weakness, right, the lack of access to finance among rural women in coffee, into a strength. And in 2019, the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, a fabulous institution that looks at analytical approaches to understanding the role of different factors in over 100 plus countries in maintaining peace and the specific impacts on women. And one of the things that the Georgetown 2019 Indicators Report identified is that between 2014 and 2017, India, so as we all know, a coffee producing country, was able to change the gender gap in access to finance from 20 to 6, right? So making an improvement on the Georgetown scale, 20 to 6. And the way they were able to do this was innovative biometric identification systems that made it possible for people without paper to have bank accounts, right? So the intervention, the improvement, the addressing a significant weakness in, coffee, but a number of industries in India, had a lot to do with looking at the problem as financial access, but then also what are the cascading effects that influence it, and its policy, right? The government policy that requires identification systems, and its reality, and the reality being that women often do not have the identification necessary to achieve bank accounts.
Okay, Callum, thank you. Michael?
So I think when listening to you all there, I was kind of smiling because I was kind of thinking, very much focusing in on that chain, and that's down at the down very much in the supply area. And then I was thinking, when's the consumer going to get involved in this? When am I going to hear the consumer? I think Annette, you touched upon it. Like I heard engaging in coffee. But I think from my kind of perspective, the way I frame this is you've got to look at it from a financial, the barriers as such, right? from a financial or structural and operational, technological, right? And I think it's the kind of doing the right thing is probably never been so difficult. I always, forgive me, but I always look at other industries to try and help inspire and kind of spark. You know, if I look at things like the clothing industry and the challenges they're facing in relation to how do they get circular? I mean, 25% of their clothing is produced as end up in a landfill, right, or incinerated, right? So their starting position really tricky, right? Then I start to think about, well, how do consumers reward those businesses who encourage and use the kind of circular economy, or embrace and engage with certain types of farmers to make it more, bring it back down to the kind of back of the chain, right? And then I start to think about, well, who within the supply circle, if you want to call it that, should be responsible, right? Because I've heard, you different focus points along, but it's like it's not solely down to one party, right? It's how do you then work across that? So that's why I always think it's a chain, because you are dependent on others. I'm sorry, but I do feel that you've got to look beyond just that one echelon to your left or to your right. And then I kind of think, well, what's the government doing to incentivize, right? And how do they kind of align those business interests with consumer interests? And then as I just keep thinking about this, it's how do you drive that change? What are the initiatives? Because you are doing some good things. I think it was Paul was referring to, he's seeing that from his kind of outside in. But it's almost kind of, well, where do you take it? Right? Where do you put the stake in the ground? Because a lot of people can talk and talk and talk, but it's almost kind of, when does action kick in? And, I kind of think back to, forgive me, but I think back to a book I read through my studies about Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, which was talking about different products, right? But that was talking about finance, and that was back in, the 90s? And why are governments not supporting, or why are other parts of the chain not going in there and doing something about it? I don't have the answer, and I'm not suggesting for a moment I'm trying to, but I think it's more, how do you accelerate that, or how do you kind of overcome it? Because I don't think it's so much barriers, it's more decisions, and how do you then support each other through that?
Okay, thank you all. Okay, very quickly. So let's move on to the third segment. So far, we're following the rule of three, not the rule of six. So I'm quite satisfied at this stage. So we will have now the last segment, which essentially covers the solutions, the resilient strategies, perhaps some of the agile solutions like AI, blockchain, in order to resolve all these challenges. Okay, and let's start with Peter.
Thanks, Joseph. Well, I'm, as you know from a previous conversation, a big fan of blockchain as long as it is implemented properly. I think that a lot of times there's a false equivalency when we start talking about knowing exactly where coffee comes from, that it's produced sustainably. That just because we have transparency in a supply chain, that somehow magically that translates to it also being sustainable, and it's not. Those are two different things. Transparency is one step in the journey to sustainably produced coffee. I think that when blockchain technologies are properly implemented, it becomes a two-way street for the flow of information. And a farmer can see how her coffee either gains or decreases in value as it goes through the supply chain. And that helps to have a kernel of information that can help in the negotiation phase. It also gives them a much wider view about the supply circle itself, and a broader understanding about global economics. The other thing I'd like to bring up is that in all of these conversations, and I've been part of conversations like this for a couple of decades now, the voice that's always absent in these conversations when we're talking about producers is a producer. There's no producer being represented in this conversation today. We are talking about their needs and their challenges, but yet we never hear from them. And I think that it's really, really important when we're talking about strategies to, as other panelists have referenced, that it has to start with what their needs are. And we need to hear their stories and their challenges rather than us assuming what they are or what they should be. So as we start to engage in these different technologies, any sort of digitization of the supply circle, I think it's really important that all stakeholders are represented at the table, similar to any other conversations about sustainability.
Oh, thanks, Peter. Okay, Annette, would you like to continue that line of thought, please?
Yes, great. Actually, to the last point, that's a very nice segue into what I wanted to bring to that part of the discussion, and echoing some of the examples that we've heard here. So it's not that there's nothing happening already. So, and it's also not that, like there are not good examples out there that can be and should be scaled. But isn't it also necessary to, like have perhaps a much more open culture established as part of this new thinking about a circular supply, or a supply circle, that we can actually learn more from mistakes and that we can actually learn? So that needs open listening to all the different stakeholders there. I think it was Paul, it was you who referred to some of the work that colleagues of mine are doing with coffee producing communities, with the public sector side, with the private sector stakeholders who are all, everybody has an interest in a successful, profitable coffee production that is also sustainable and that is fit for the future. There are, what I wanted to bring to this table here is that there are very inspiring and good, perhaps too small actions already underway that directly also connect with this idea of circular economy, and bring it down to very concrete practical needs that actually were prioritized locally through the public-private platforms that, for example, the Global Coffee Platform is supporting in coffee-producing countries, where people can sit together and listen to each other and also align and understand where the different needs are. And that then is reflected in, for example, national coffee sustainability curricula that enable a much clearer messaging and much clearer concrete support in terms of access of information, access to knowledge for coffee farmers and workers to produce coffee more sustainably, but also to gain more by reducing costs or by having better market access or by finding new varieties or by also getting access to finance and services. So why is that? Why am I making such a big point there? You would want to say, oh, but that is what everybody has been doing for years. We believe that it's very important to, like define, help understanding or enable, not help, enable a more holistic understanding of sustainability in line with the local needs and the global needs. And that can then translate using the new media, the new technology, the big data, if there is access to it, and if it can be comparably made available, to make much better business decisions, to make much better investment decisions, and to actually scale what works through, for example, GCP collective action initiatives that tackle water or tackle social well-being and living conditions, or the recurring challenges of agro inputs and pesticides. That is all part, very concrete part of circular economy thinking. So this is underway. We are very happy to share more examples. This is going beyond the time that is available for this webinar here. But it's the message here is collective action is happening. It's not only talking, and we need more people to join us here, and people from all over the coffee table.
Fantastic. Okay, Dr. Siju?
Well, I think most have been said, but the solution, I think, should be to the strategy to build the resilience of the weakest link of this whole value chain, and which is the farmer. But I think that if we have a more integration between the industry, roaster, and the farmer, that they can build this blockchain strategy, for instance, that can give more light on how coffee farmer can get more benefit from this, and also the industry will know which coffee farmer is doing what. And I think this kind of integration will reduce intermediary, and also it will increase the visibility of the market. And to do that, we need to, first of all, to concentrate our effort on supporting already. There are some initiatives already on the ground, but the problem is how to scale it up. If you intervention in a country with 400,000 coffee farmers, and there is just a program initiative for 60 farmers or 60,000 farmers. For me, this also need to be supported because they are a good example in Eastern Africa. I think Annette mentioned some, and I also know a lot in other parts of East Africa. But those initiatives need to be supported and to be strengthened in order to include all coffee farmers in the region. I think this is an example to show how concretely we can build the resilience of a coffee farmer, and at the same time make the supply chain resilient for the industry, consumers, and also for people who produce it.
Thank you, Dr. Suju. Paul?
Thank you. Yeah, you know, I spent my life being a big sort of supporter and promoter of technology. But of course, you have to be very careful that, you know, it's not technology for the sake of it. And it's really, you know, let's start with the issue, the problem, and you know, is there a technology that will allow us to overcome that? And I think that's the thing that we should continue to bear in mind. I mean, I think both Michael and Peter have rightly sort of pulled us up and talked about the consumer at one end and the producer at the other. And somebody I was listening to recently talked about them as the bookends of the industry. You know, what the producer's one bookend, the consumer's the other bookend. I like that. It's a nice sort of turn of phrase. Yeah, I do see opportunities for technology, certainly at the producer level, and it's back to this point of access to communication, because in some ways, you know, it's, you know, the sort of the smartphone technology is rolling out, and it's rolling out not necessarily to the producer, but maybe to the next generation of that producer. You know, that those producers' children, you know, starting to access that technology more and more. So how do we most effectively use that? And maybe that's where some of the funding that we've sort of talked about, and the funding challenges, you know, maybe that's where we should look at. The bigger challenge for me is at the consumer end, because again, coming into the industry, that the thing that concerns me most, and it, you know, people may put me right on this, is, you know, coffee itself has some very big challenges over the next 20 or 30 years, you know, particularly driven by climate, etc., etc. So, you know, its production, and the production at the level we need it at, is, you know, is under some sort of challenge. Can we use these sorts of technologies to ensure that we pull the consumer into those issues more, that we get the consumer to understand some of the challenges, because we need the consumer to buy into helping to support the work that the industry needs to do. And inevitably that comes with a price tag, and the consumer will be picking up a lot of that price tag. I suspect a lot of consumers would be more than happy to pick that tag up, because it won't actually be very much on their average cup of coffee, their jar of coffee, etc. But the thing that I still haven't got my head around is how do we use that technology going forward to bring them into the fold? Because I think if we don't do that, A, we're missing a trick, but I think B, we probably have a much bigger problem going down the road. So I think those are the areas where I see, you know, technology having the biggest sort of impact. But again, somebody talked about, you know, working together, and I think one of the issues I do see is there's an awful lot of work going on in the industry, I'm not sure whether there's the level of strategic coordination that's needed, and maybe, you know, certainly from an association point of view, and BCA, you know, in there as well, we need to be working more strategically, and that doesn't necessarily mean different new organisations springing up. How can we work within the system we've got to make sure that all of the good that's happening is channeled most effectively?
Well, thank you, Paul. Callum?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of marry the two of the points made, one by Paul and one by Peter. And I think it's important, as Peter was pointing out, how, you know, technology applied and considered cautiously, appropriately, et cetera, can provide means for advancement. You know, for example, the example that was shared was how seeing the price progression of a farmer's coffee can inform negotiations at the next harvest, next cycle. I think that can only be effective if that farmer has the training and resources and, quite frankly, the confidence to become a price maker, right? To advocate and participate fully in the negotiations. So, you know, I think it's important to not only look at, okay, what does that technology do for the sake of the technology's perhaps primary intention, but what are the enabling factors that need to be in place for that vision of the technology's solution to actually be achieved. And in the case of women, you know, we often know that it's a lack of access to business training, business skills, for which negotiation is a critical business skill. I also think in terms of looking at all of the actors involved, and if there is a willingness to pay for all that goes into coffee, we also have to look at transparency, not just specific to price, but transparency specific to, okay, what is being achieved, what is being done? You know, are the sustainability interventions that are claimed or so broadly announced with beautiful graphics, et cetera, you know, are the individual actors actually achieving them? Are they thoughtfully considered? You know, and I'm not advocating from a position of you know, persecute the greenwashers, et cetera, but I'm saying that the responsibility for acting with information informed by transparency efforts rests among all of us, and like Michael was pointing to, especially among the consumer. Those consumers who are still in positions to make price choices based on coffee quality, et cetera, because many consumers are out of work right now also due to the COVID, the impacts of COVID, et cetera, are those consumers who have decision making or decisions informed by sustainability. Do they also have the information they need to ensure that those sustainability interventions, part of what they're buying, are accurate and true? So I think technology has a role to play in helping us all to understand the impacts of the decisions we make and whether the interventions are truly effective, and if those lessons are then shared for the betterment of the industry as a whole. One other point, I don't want to get lost in the question on technology. There can also be a downside to technology. And a recent report by McKinsey Global Institute identified that, you know, in the growing shift to automation, 1 in 4 women will lose their job due to automation. You know, the global estimate is, you know, 40 to 160 million women are currently in roles that are likely to automate in the next few years. And so that's a tremendous job loss. So, you know, perhaps automation is a necessary part of innovation, but yet another reason why we need to be looking and convening and thinking from a systems ripple effect perspective.
Thank you, Callum. Michael?
Ellen, you raised a good point, but I would go off at a tangent if I started discussing some of those points with you around automation. You get into my sweet spot very quickly. I think the pandemic has shown us that automation and those buzzwords around artificial intelligence actually can really get you in a lot of trouble if you're not careful. But that's another conversation. Paul, I liked your points, clearly. Some of your points were really resonating with me there. I think the thing for me is when emergence of digital, right. I think from my perspective, being a supply chain, we love toys, new shiny toys. Digital has really done that for us. It's how do you kind of reframe the question to use, how do you use that kind of technology, that data, drive insights to drive action, right? So I did a bit of research and I just wanted to throw some stats at you here quickly, right? So Gartner, right, who I use quite a lot, one of the kind of research institutes, the next 18 months, 70% of supply chain leaders are planning to invest in their circular economies, right? Now, we've got all the shiny toys. We've talked about, the panelists here have referred to things like blockchain. I've referred to AI, IoT, 3D printing, you name it. But I think the kind of thing here is there's a wave here, right? We're on some kind of, we've got momentum, right? For me, it comes back to how do I improve my visibility? How do I get that view that goes beyond my echelon to my left or my right? How do I get to see it all? Or that provenance, which we've talked about, traceability. The other thing that's really crucial to me is around cost to serve, right? Which comes back to this, if I can educate my consumer and I'm doing X, Y, and Z that is going to be able to provide whatever it is around farmers or the entire supply, educate me on it, right? I might buy it, I might not, but at least educate me on it, right? Let me be part of that decision. I think, when we talk about blockchain, for a number of years, it's been a solution looking for a problem, in my opinion. But the more and more I spend in this space, and clearly PwC being the kind of professional service firm, we do a lot of investment in this. You're starting to see where it's starting to come through, right? And it's played its point. I think one of the other panelists referred to there's differences around provenance and traceability. Yes, but I think it's a good start, and it's not the most expensive thing to get going. I think when I look at what others are doing, so Netherlands-based Dutch Awareness, you probably never heard of, they're creating their own barcode enablement, track and trace systems, right, following the clothing through the entire life cycle, right? Once consumers finish with it, they hand it back, right? You look at last week, the chocolate manufacturer Mondelez and AIM partnering on a cloud of digital watermarks, right? This week even, IKEA planning to offer to buy back used furniture to recycle. I think the point I'm trying to make here is there's enough going on elsewhere, right? And it's not to say you're going to be perfect in any way, because none of these guys are perfect, but it's to show the willingness to engage in initiatives and not to put it, I think if I was going to conclude, Joseph, I know you're going to shoot me in a minute, tell me to just be quiet, but I think what I'd kind of say is, I don't think there's one size that fits all, sadly. It's how do you harness your industry to drive the change and what can be learned from others, since we're all in it together, whether we're in coffee, whether we're in tea or wherever. It's how do we do something about making it better for all partners across, or the circle of supply. And I would beg you all, please don't put this in the too difficult to solve bucket, because it does need addressing.
Okay, brilliant, Michael. So, well, that's the end of the panel discussion. I would like to thank everybody for keeping their speech under 3 minutes. And I didn't think it was possible, but it is possible. Okay. I think you deserve a round of applause. Okay. Can we clap ourselves? Okay, let's carry on. We have first question from Gregoire Abadi from Rainforest, Mexico. Asociado, Señor en Mercados, Señor Markets Associate. In producing countries, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, etc., usually the best coffees are exported to other countries. On the ground, it's hard for smallholders to be directly part of an international supply chain. Is there an opportunity in these countries to develop consumption in the internal market of good coffees, and so developing shorter and easier supply chain? Who wants to answer that question? Peter? Peter, can you unmute? Yeah. Okay, we might have something there. Okay, we can hear Peter. Let's solve that one. Annette, do you want to, Peter, I'm sorry. So can we, while we're fixing that? Okay, Peter, can you hear me? Peter? Okay.
It's still muted.
Okay. All right. Peter?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Ah, yeah, yes, fantastic. Thank
Okay.
you. All right.
Sorry.
Can we start?
So the question is about developing an internal market for higher quality coffee so that they're not exported.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a question that comes up quite a bit, and I think that there are several challenges and hurdles to overcome. One being that in many coffee producing countries there is not a very robust coffee drinking culture, because it has always been viewed as a really highly valued export. There is not the infrastructure for roasting, distribution, the number of coffee shops, and I worked for many years in Rwanda, and saw that it started to be developed, but it only really reached a certain level of the population, a certain demographic, and it really wasn't enough to support a robust internal market that would then compete with the value that coffee had to export. So I think that there's been a variety of different approaches to this. One being that, well, maybe if we roast it in the country of origin and then export it, but then you have all of the problems with distribution in consuming countries, and they don't have the relationships. So I think that this is sometimes looked at as an easier solution than it is in practicality.
Yeah, I can add.
Okay,
Joseph.
yes, anybody can speak, okay?
Well, I just wanted to ask a question for Peter or maybe Dennis, since you seem to have a lot of experience in this. What role, in your experience, what role does national policy or national law play in facilitating the domestic consumption of high quality coffees? Is there in fact an interplay between what would be allowed in a country in terms of grades of coffee to export and the development of the infrastructure that you pointed out, Peter?
Okay, Kellen, Peter, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's really on a case-by-case basis, but obviously, a lot of economies are based on the value of these valuable crops, whether it's coffee or gold or tea or silicon. So I think that again, it's difficult to look at this as like, okay, if we just address this, that would be the key that would unlock this prosperity, right? Because it's so different in so many different countries. And I'm sure that Dennis would have something to say about this as well. I mean, there's in certain countries, there's the auction system, which is run by the government, right? In Kenya, Tanzania, for example, Ethiopia, which really controls how much coffee is sold for and how it gets distributed within the country.
Thank you, Peter. Annette, would you like to come in, Annette?
Sure, just topping up on what was said earlier, and I would also recommend for us to hear the perspective from the ICO, who has been for years and decades actually promoting coffee consumption, not only in the traditional, perhaps known markets that some of us have been referring to, but also especially in coffee producing countries. So there's years of experience there. But like the piece that I wanted to throw in here, just building on what you said, Peter, sometimes it's seen as an easy fix, and it's not so easy. So it's good to look at all the preconditions for a successful, value addition and roasting and exporting, and then placing it in markets where then suddenly there is a huge market saturation and there is competition already for price and for the known brands. But what I think is really to be further explored, and there's work underway to double that up, is expanding the joy of coffee and the acceptance of coffee in coffee producing countries. I think we can learn a lot from Ethiopia. that's sometimes forgotten a bit. That's the cradle of Arabica coffee, and Ethiopia is drinking a lot of coffee. And Brazil has also been showing, as a perhaps initially non-so-traditional coffee drinker, a huge success case there. India, Indonesia, Mexico as well. So I shouldn't actually start naming names, because then people will complain with me leaving certain important other examples out. But like, there are examples there, and it's perhaps worth studying it. And perhaps that is what Dennis, what you would also refer to in the work that the ICO is bringing forward in that and on that track.
Okay, thank you, Annette. Dr. Sergio, do you want
yes,
to
on this
respond to that?
subject, and from the question of Kerem, I think there are a lot of things to do, but I'll try to concentrate on few. First of all, coffee consumption in Africa is growing, and there is a potential. Mind you, Africa export around 12 million 60 kilo bags a year, and the whole Africa consume nearly the same amount per year. That means there is a potential. So if you take the case of, if I come back to the question from the gentleman in Mexico, yes, at the beginning, the industry, they tend to process locally low quality coffee and export the high quality coffee. But with the consumer, the demand of a consumer, the trend has changed. To be specific, in Ethiopia, coffee that was refused from the auction, that coffee went back to the market. Then it feed the local consumption. But then the industry, they realized that it is more profitable to process coffee locally. So it's not only now the low quality, but also good quality exportable coffee can go to the local market. So I think this was the case long time ago in the 80s in Brazil, when they start with processing only low quality coffee for local consumption. But the consumption didn't go up. But when they decided to upgrade the quality of the local consumption, then the consumption went up. And Brazil is today the second largest consumer after the European Union. So I think there is a potential in many countries, and the enabling environment in some countries is free, it's okay, but in some other countries, the limitation is sometimes the cumbersome regulation about health issues and so on. Otherwise, the potential is there. And the ICO has been working on that to promote domestic consumption as a part of a strategy to expand demand in order to bring a market to balance and have a fair price. So this is a huge program. So
okay,
that's
thank
why
you,
I say it's a lot.
I want to bring in Paul. Paul, please.
Yes.
I'm not sure I can add to the increasing the domestic consumption to what Peter's already said. I suppose my issue on the value added exports is, yes, the possibilities are there, but you really have to do your homework, and I guess part of that is how do you develop the cooperative structure to start with as the part of that process. And I think if I look at the other industries, the other commodities I've been involved in, that sort of approach, that cooperative approach really has been the start of how people have built the value-added chains that now exist.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Michael, just a few minutes. Thank you. Michael? Yes?
Joseph, sorry, I disappeared. The signal went on me.
That's okay. Quick, please.
On what point?
The point of your response to the question from Mexico.
Which was, sorry,
well, it's about the internal market, how we can develop consumption in the internal market.
As in where it's produced?
Yes.
Yeah, so I suppose there it's more how do you give the access and how do you cost it in such a way that it brings out more in that marketplace, I think is really, and I think that's how do you you balance off that export versus your kind of local market needs. I think one of the interesting things for me, and forgive me for going off key a bit, is there's a point that one of the other questions that have been asked is around how do we block cheap product, right? Or how do we do whatever we need to do to make sure that that quality product comes through? And I think that also affects your local as well. Is, you know, different products have got different value in different countries, right? And I think it's what is the right answer for how you service both? And I think that's where I would be kind of challenging around how do you, is there something you can do around incentivizing to allow more in the local versus the exporting, or do you penalize on the export to encourage the import? To encourage the local. I think that's trying to find the balance.
Okay, let's go to the next question from Caleb Denyu, CDF Trust and Consulting BV, Managing Partner, Zimbabwe. The coffee chain is broken. The coffee production agriculture has been decapitated from commercial coffee benefits. How do you transfer some of the coffee profits to the coffee farmers? And how do we commercially finance coffee production, which with its structured finance, given the huge investment required for years before production? Anybody? Any takers? Peter? Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, that's sort of one of the foundational pillars of fair trade is to actually have a different level of trade and an alternative level of trade that isn't just reliant on, but actually runs in parallel to what the C market offers to coffee producers. Last year, in the 2018-2019 harvest, there was a major multinational importer-exporter that came out with a paper that said that in excess of 60% of smallholder producers did not meet the cost of production in the price that they had to sell their coffee at. I mean, this is as I said before, an existential threat to the very foundation of coffee. So unless we can have a lot of projects to address a variety of different issues, and they're all important, right? Whether it's climate change, whether it's gender equality, access to education, but unless the coffee farmer wakes up, as I said before, and says, you know what, I'm gonna do another day of work on the coffee farm, and they see this as a viable way of making a living, then we're all kind of swimming in the dark, because the coffee industry is based on this group of smallholder farmers. So I think that value distribution is a really important point, and it has to begin with these kinds of conversations among a variety of different stakeholders to how do you equitably distribute that. And I've always advocated for a conversation where we have roasters and retailers and traders, and we have a conversation about how much of the pie would you be willing to give up to actually ensure the sustainability of coffee? Would you be willing to take 20% less, 10% less? What's the number? And the conversation always goes to consumers. And I think that one of the problems is that the coffee industry itself is guilty of presenting a very rosy picture of coffee farming and coffee production. We celebrate coffee farmers. We show happy farmers. And we don't really show the realities of the coffee industry, because no one wants anyone to drink coffee feeling bad. Right? So we need to talk about how we market coffee, and I think that will lead to a broader discussion about value distribution.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much. Sorry about that. Okay, Kellum, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Peter said. I was having a conversation just yesterday with one of our chapters in a coffee producing country. And when the pandemic passes, they are actively working to organize an origin trip, right? A trip to facilitate roasters, retailers, anybody who's interested to come to their location and visit with farmers. And what the farmers had told our chapter leaders was, well, I don't know that we can do the trip right then. The roads are bad. The roads are terrible. And what our chapter leaders said is no, make them understand everything you go through to bring that coffee to market, right? So if the road washes out and you have to stand and you have to walk and you have to go around, etc., this is the reality of coffee. And so whether we're talking about an origin trip for a mid-size roaster, or whether we're talking a multi-international, etc., I think it can begin with access to information about, okay, you want to come see it? Well, you know what? It may not be a vegetarian meal, and it may not be, a bug-free experience, and you may get dirty, and, because this is the reality of bringing coffee to market. But then it's the back and forth with, okay, well, how do we help appreciate, help people appreciate that reality in a way that doesn't so turn them away that they go somewhere else, right? Because if this origin trip looks too real, too rugged, they can always go to another coffee origin. So I think it's part of, like we've been saying over and over, collective action on, how do we make it real and accessible, and especially in these times of economic crisis, not end up playing one origin off of another because someone decides to be the leader in sharing the reality of this is what it takes to bring that joyful cup to you.
Thank you, Kellen. Annette, do you want to jump in?
Very, very good point, actually. This is what I meant in the previous discussion, like, hey, let's be honest. Yeah, I mean, this is part of being able to then address and overcome some of the challenges that we've been mentioning. And the question is a very good one, but it's a very fundamental one. So if any of us was able to squeeze the answer in 3 minutes, which is the time that we have here, probably would, we would not be talking here, but doing much more work here already, right? No, but the points that I wanted to make here is we know actually what the challenges are. And many of us in the industry also know. And there's more need for origin trips, but like the knowledge is there what the issues are. That they are not being portrayed towards the consumers is exactly because of the reasons that you mentioned now, Kellen, for example. But like, hey, isn't there need for a much more courageous approach to actually also then do something about these challenges? And I say yes, and there is work underway in various areas, including in the work of the Global Coffee Platform, where we always talk about challenges and about the bad stuff. But back to the question. So if the economic viability of sustainable coffee farming is not secured, we won't have coffee in the future. And not to even talk about the effects from COVID, and not to even talk about the effects from climate change, which are real and happening right now, but might become much more impactful in the future as well. So this needs to be one of the key priorities, and that includes all the voices and the perspectives of people that we've been mentioning and who are not here right now directly part of this panel from coffee producing countries. Now, there are good examples of how some of those very systemic challenges are being tackled with very concrete, practical, good sustainability practices to be applied in the coffee producing plots in the farm. So that needs to be scaled. And if we find smarter ways to kind of portray that and talk about the challenges, but in a way that it's not bringing down one or the other coffee origin against the others, that's I like that question that you put out there. On the other hand side, let's also be realistic in terms of the fact that the coffee producing countries are competing, as it is with our market-based or capitalistic order of the world, right? So there are coffee producers who are still making money with these low levels of price. So how can we make sure that those who need to be part of that round table of that circular economy that should be waking up in the morning and also wanting to go to their coffee farm are also making a good living from that coffee, perhaps then through diversification, through other access of income. That is the type of conversation and action which needs to be growing in our industry, because there are different economic realities and there's a competitiveness aspect there as well.
Thank you, Annette. Okay, we have a few minutes left. Paul, I'll give it to you, and then Michael, we have 4 minutes left. Thank you very much. 2 minutes each. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, I think this comes back to my earlier point about, the consumer, building the consumer understanding, but in such a way, I don't know enough about it as a consumer, but I don't want to be told in such a way that turns me off. I can soon turn over the channel. So how do we do it? You brought Michael in today as an expert. I think, perhaps the coffee industry needs to look outside itself a little bit more to say, this is our problem. Who can help us? Who has the sort of the skill set to do it? And just looking at it from a UK point of view, and bearing in mind that wherever you are in the world, we've all still got a good few months to sort of get through the end of this pandemic at least. It will be interesting to understand how the market in some of the consuming countries changes, what the effects are in terms of the commodity market versus the specialty market. And I think we don't know the answers yet. But I think it does at the moment give quite an opportunity with the increase in online selling that that a lot of very small retail outlets have been very good at, very reactive to. How do we build that sort of? Is this a good opportunity to build that better understanding, which in itself may actually make that switch from
I think from my kind of point of view, it's a supply and demand debate, right? And I think your point really valid there, Paul, around the specialty versus commodity, and actually how do you play that off to then get the right outcome. I think also, I kind of struggle with your supply and demand, and how do you best manage that and squeeze on supply to get the demand. But I think that's where the challenge around, is it a commodity or is it a specialty, plays out, because you've got to be able to restrict.
Okay, all right, we have 1 minute left. Dr. Sujil, you have the last word. ICO, yes. 1 minute.
My last word as ICO is that as far as small order coffee are concerned, I think aggregation is the solution. Aggregation can help them to get proper access to funding. But two bag producing members, farmers cannot get.
Thank you all. 4:30. Once again, thank you everybody, and thank you all for today.
And Joseph, just want to extend thank you to you and Mavis for hosting this wonderful and innovative approach. And as a panelist, Peter, I think you deserve extra applause for going first for every question. Have a great day, and thank you, everyone.
I will make sure that all of us will enjoy the conversation, and obviously we will record this and also publish it on our website. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Right. Thank you. Bye.
Kellen, bye, everybody. And thank you all for your
Stay safe and healthy. Bye.
Bye. You too.